Hey, welcome to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm also a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management. Today on our show, we're going to talk about the difference between a broker versus an advisor. Now, for many of you watching and listening, you know I speak heavily around the topic of having an advisor, and I've gotten some questions recently on the show around some differences. So I want to break this down for you. But before we do, make sure to smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. All right, let's get into it. So going back a bit, starting in like the 80s, I think really accelerating through the 90s, brokers, as we might want to call them in that regard, recast themselves, if you will, into the role historically played by investment advisors. And so to many individuals out there, right, the distinction is somewhat semantic. So I want to go through that broker versus advisor thing because there is some differences, you know. As long as you might be thinking, as long as I'm getting good investment advice, like who cares, right? Well, I do. And I want to share this with you, okay? There is a difference that is important to understand. Brokers and advisors are governed by two different rules. Let's just start there. And those rules have a bearing on your rights as a client and as an investor. Basically a consumer, if you will, in this world, and the obligations, I should say, for also brokers and advisors that they have to you and your money. So it's important to know these distinctions. So brokers, let's start there. They operate under what we call a quote unquote know your customer standard, which is governed by the National Association of Securities Dealers. We know this as NASD. All right. Now, under that standard, brokers are obligated to offer clients quote unquote suitable investments. Now, what defines suitable, in my opinion, gets very subjective very fast. So while a broker would have trouble justifying the sale of, say, a volatile internet stock, for example, to an 80-year-old seeking income, or a broker could argue that sticking that same retiree and saying something junky like a variable annuity contract is suitable, even though such annuities or that tech stock I mentioned, in my opinion, are generally ill-advised for older retirees. So now courts have ruled in the past that brokers generally have no legal responsibility to look out for a client's best interest, even if a client relies on the broker's advice to buy or sell that particular investment. And NASD rules mandate that the brokers have to act fairly with investors. And I say this because that's a good thing. Still, I think a lot of things can happen though, right? There's a lot of bad apples out there, and this happens all the time, sadly. Now, advisors, a true advisor, operate under the principles of what we know as fiduciary duty, which is a legal obligation to put the client's needs first. Now, real quickly, that's not to imply that a fiduciary duty is necessarily better or that a dishonest advisor won't rip you off, okay? However, in disputes, for example, fiduciary obligations can be easier to argue than the standards of suitability. So the difference here really comes down to the suitable versus the fiduciary standard. And I just want you to know those differences as you're going into it. Further, advisors also must disclose, under fiduciary standard, conflicts of interest that they have, as well as how they're compensated, among other things. All of which, by the way, this reporting is done under Form ADV. Well, we spoke about this one recently, which the advisor is obligated to give you. Now, Form ADV is available, by the way, also on the SEC website for your advisor. You can go and check that out. Now, advisors must give you the part 2 of the form, but part 1 actually can be very enlightening as well, and I'll share why. Because it details things like disciplinary actions, if there are any, against that advisor. It's also on the SEC website as well, so you can look at both. Now, brokers, meanwhile, are not obligated to hand you any particular form disclosing their potential conflicts of interest. Though again, you can also still check for any disciplinary actions for them on the NASD website. So again, you can look on the homepage right there on the NASD where it says broker check, and many of the brokers are duly registered as broker and advisor and often suggest investments, I would say, wearing their advisory hat, and then they'll transact for you on those suggestions as a broker. So again, know the differences. Ask these questions of them. That's really what I'm trying to say here today. Now, determining what rules apply, suitable or fiduciary duty, can actually be challenging in my opinion. So I want to go a little further here. Here's what I want you to remember. The best way to look at it is the type of account you have determines the rules under which you and your broker or advisor are ultimately playing. So I thought I'd break down in very simple terms on this show today. And this whole context today came from a book I was reading called The Wall Street Journal Complete Personal Finance Guidebook. I recommend that book. It's great. It was written by a guy named Jeff Opdyke, and he breaks this down very clearly. And I wanted to share this openly today as we talk about this subject, all right? So today, a brokerage account is subject to suitability rules. We just mentioned that, right? And an advisory account is subject to fiduciary duty rules. Okay, here's how to tell the two apart. You have a brokerage account if your broker doesn't have permission to trade without without your consent, meaning it's a non-discretionary account. On the inverse, you have an advisory account if your person does have permission to trade without your consent, meaning it's discretionary. It's a discretionary account. You also have an advisory account if you pay for the advice separate from the fees or commissions charged on the account. And lastly, I'll state this, you have an advisory account, staying in that camp for a second, if your person represents or presents him or herself as a planner and offers things like financial planning services or actually delivers a plan. Now, on the other side, right, you won't necessarily see that with a brokerage account. So mainly today, friends, I think it's important for me as an advisor here talking to you on the Make Your Money Matter show, when I talk about finding advice and finding counsel, to know the difference, because there is one. A broker really doesn't have to, again, disclose much conflict of interest and just have to fall under the suitable category. And again, I just want to share this, that can be subjective. Whereas an advisor, if they're really an advisor to you, has to fall under the fiduciary duty. And here at One Capital Management, that's our status, right? We fall under the fiduciary advisor to our clients, and we've been doing that since inception. And I wanted each of you to know the differences, so when you're out there finding that right person to help you with your finances, you can ask the right questions and know the difference. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that today. If you did, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more of this content and you never miss an episode. And always remember to make your money matter.